Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel, where today we're going to be talking Dreams of Another on PSVR2 and PS5. Now I have quite a bit to say about this very strange game, and unfortunately this one isn't as positive as we usually are, because this is one of those PSVR2 games that I just couldn't really gel with. Now that being said, I haven't finished it yet. I had a couple of days hands-on with it before the embargo lifted, and I've played about 2 hours, so I can't really confirm the runtime, but of what I have played, I can give you my impressions. With that being said, let's thank our patrons and members, and please subscribe to the channel if you feel so inclined, as only 25% you actually are, and let's kick things off with these impressions. Dreams of Another is quite an interesting premise, actually. It puts you in the shoes of a person in bed who goes to sleep and experiences the memories of other people, walking around them and interacting with them, but the way they interact with these memories is through weaponry. A really cool idea, in my opinion. Instead of these weapons destroying items in the dream world, they create, and as you shoot, you form the world around you, utilizing different things like RPGs and grenades to your advantage to progress the story, in quotations a little bit there. This game starts off in the most part fairly strong, placing you in the shoes of a soldier who is unwilling to fight, giving you a contextual reason for having these weapons in the game as a key staple of destruction for creation. And immediately the first issue reared its ugly head here. Throughout this entire opening segment, all the dialogue is narrated and voice acted towards you, expressing the soldiers' feelings about not wanting to fight and not being able to pull the trigger on their weaponry. Unfortunately, this dialogue is conveyed to you very poorly. The voice acting here is not good, I've got to be honest. I don't know whether it's a directorial choice or whether the voice actors just weren't that experienced, or whether it's a translation issue or something, but I just really didn't gel with these at all.
Damn it. It's an ambush. Return fire.
I'm sorry, but my own stop motion short films from a while ago, they have better voice acting than this.
You and your men are in rough shape. Take cover behind that wreckage. I'll get you out of here.
From here though, you go back to embodying the sleeping person and you dream walk through various different pasts, presents and futures of people around the world, again using the weapons to create the environment around you and solve puzzles, quote unquote. Now for the first couple hours at least of what I've played, these puzzles consist of walking up to a person after shooting the environment and forming it and speaking to them. They'll then tell you something, and they might tell you to go and find an item or find a certain doorway or something like that, but there's never really that much of a challenge. It very much feels like a surreal walking simulator. The gameplay is spiced up by some enemy encounters, I guess you could call them, but they don't attack you. You have infinite ammo in your weaponry, and in some of the cases which I've got to so far, such as a manhole cover that moves around the environment and you have to shoot, and a Ferris wheel that also moves around the environment and you have to shoot. These just involve you shooting targets, pretty much. They don't fight back, and the most they do is disrupt the environment, making you move slower and making you have to reform the environment with your weaponry again. And these just didn't really make for very intense or fun encounters. They're surreal, for sure, but they weren't fun. So that's the crux of the gameplay really. You walk through various dreams, you interact with NPCs which will then tell you parts of their story, which don't linger long enough to really hit home, and then you move on to another one. Occasionally you'll come back to a previous story that you started earlier, so it does feel very surreal and fragmented in this sense, but I just found that I couldn't latch on to any of these stories in particular, and none of them really struck me in a way, apart from the starting one about the soldier, and even then that was hampered by the voice acting, which unfortunately is the same quality throughout the game. Now I realise I've just spoken for 5 minutes about the gameplay and kind of the premise here, and not touched on the actual VR port. Now I played mostly in VR, but about 20 minutes in flat as well, just to see how it was, and the VR integration is probably as good as it can be in terms of gameplay here, because honestly there isn't that much to do. You have your hands, and it is quite cool to move them through objects and see these pixely environments dissipate, which we'll talk about in a second, but for the most part you're just shooting your gun or throwing grenades from your hip and walking around with your limited sprint that can then be upgraded, but again we'll talk about that in a second. The visuals look okay, it's a little bit blurry in the far distance, but the art style really helps it here to make it look a bit cleaner, but there are no manual reloads. Your gun just reloads itself after firing 100 rounds, which is a very large magazine of course, but you do actually get to physically throw the grenades at least. Head haptics are utilised all the time, so I'll give them fair play for that, and adaptive triggers too. So in terms of features being used, this is really good, but in terms of engaging VR gameplay, it's really not for me. I was hoping for another Paper Beast style story where I would kind of be confused and enveloped by this surreal narrative that I can't really fully understand, at least on my first playthrough, but instead I was met with something less intriguing and more dull. The visuals aren't as striking, and the gameplay and puzzles aren't as fun. I will say though, the visual style on its own is pretty damn good. Being able to phase your hand through this voxel style and circle style environment is pretty freaky, and is quite a cool VR interaction. I really enjoyed doing that.
What the fuck?
Sometimes those kinds of conversations are necessary, though.
That's so cool.
By the way, I really can't believe it when you fire a gun in this world.
But the entire game, aside from a couple of little areas, looks like this, at least from what I've played so far. And after a while, it just kind of puts me to sleep. And I usually really enjoy walking sims. I really enjoyed Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, I absolutely loved Still Wakes the Deep, but those games had something going for them in terms of kind of different areas to show off, or a gripping narrative that held me all the way through, but this just doesn't have that. And ultimately, so far, it's leaving me with a lot more questions than answers, but I can't really pass a full judgment on that until it's complete, so I'll hold off on really criticising that angle. I have enjoyed the sound design so far though. The music has been freaky, but in a good way, but unfortunately it is marred again by that voice acting. There are some mechanics thrown in there to spice things up, at least so far, with the soldier from the initial prologue following you throughout each of the areas, and if you go up to him and give him an item that you found on the floor, which is scattered around, giving you a reason to actually uncover areas of the map instead of leaving them all pixelated, he will then give you a power-up like a grenade, or he'll refill your ammo in your grenades, or he'll give you a slightly longer speed boost, for example, with your sprint. These don't really make that much of a meaningful change, to be honest though, and I never felt it was urgent to go and get these upgrades. I would just kind of see him and be like, oh yeah, that's a thing, I'll go and do that, sure. The game also, after each short level, puts you back to the main menu. I don't know if it's a bug or not, or if it's intended, because you're put back into like the view looking at the guy in bed, so maybe it is intended because you're going into another dream, if that makes sense, but it was a little bit jarring, especially in VR, because it just kind of pulls you out of it. The cutscenes in the game are also presented in this little kind of 3D window, which is a little bit cool. It doesn't have as much depth as, say, the Vertigo 2 cutscenes, but it does move a bit when you tilt your head left and right, so that's pretty interesting. But yeah, a couple of choices here that I'm just a bit baffled by. I leave this first impressions with a confusing perspective. I enjoy the ideas that Dreams of Another puts forward. I really do. I like the idea of trespassing, as weird as that sounds, into other people's memories and seeing different locations that I never would be able to in real life. Presented in this surreal style seems like a match made in heaven for VR, and on a visual level, it can be when it looks just right and when you encounter something a little bit new. But I sit here baffled by how the gameplay just hasn't really spoken to me at all. There's not too much to do, it's very repetitive, and I just feel like this game, this experience, could be so much more. However, again, I must reiterate, these are only my first impressions from my first couple of hours. I don't know how long the game is, or whether there's some massive change in gameplay, maybe it becomes a rhythm game later on or something crazy. I don't know, but for my first couple of hours at least, I am struggling with this one, and I never really usually say that. For the most part, I can get through VR games, or even if I just make a first impressions, I'm gripped throughout the first hour or two, even if I don't have the time to do a full review, but for this one, it's just not the case, and speaking to some other reviewers, they do feel the same way. Of course, don't let this deter you from picking it up if you're really set on it. If it looks like a lot of fun to you and you enjoy walking sims that are quite repetitive but might show you some cool environmental art and stuff like that, then you might have a good time here. But for me, it just isn't really it, especially in VR when I want to be doing something that I can't really do in the flat, but the gameplay here is very much flat playable, if that makes sense. VR doesn't add anything gameplay-wise, apart from being able to point the gun yourself. That being said, there is also a third-person mode where you point the gun with your head, which is a little bit disconcerting. Let me know what you think, though, in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.